Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to take place in the 15th chapter of the second book of Samuel, but the story we read really begins in the 11th chapter. The 11th chapter marks a midway point in David's 40-year reign. This is at the 20-year mark. Now, prior to this time, there's much struggle. No one gave David anything. He had to earn and fight for it and struggle for it. But before the 11th chapter, he is safe and secure on his throne. His enemies are subdued. His nation's borders are protected and territorial integrity unharassed. But he sends the men off to war. He stays home. He's 50 years old at this point. He wasn't in tip-top fighting condition, but he could have been there to offer moral support or contribute to this strategy. So for all intents and purpose, he was derelict in his kingly duties at this point. And he wasn't looking for trouble, but sure enough, trouble found him. He was gazing on the palace rooftop, and who should he notice but a beautiful woman by the name of Bathsheba, who was bathing in view of his palace after her menstrual period, and she seduces him with his eyes, and he invites her up and seduces her. And because it's after her menstrual period in washing, she gives him the worst news imaginable. I'm pregnant. She is married to Uriah the Hittite, who's one of David's top 30 valiant soldiers. So David schemes to invite Uriah back and get him drunk and sleep with his wife. But this Uriah will not do, because he's an intensely honorable man and he cannot bring himself to lay with his wife while his men are out in the field. So he sets up a tent in the street. And so after this, David arranges for him to be killed in the line of fire by instructing his general Joab through a letter that he had Uriah pass to him himself to put him in deathly danger. And then in the 12th chapter, read of the prophet Nathan's rebuke, and he pronounces punishment and the fate of David for his sin. And the relevant portion I want to read is verses 10 through 13. And now the sword does not turn aside from your house, because you have despised me, and have taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your wife. Thus said Yahweh, see, I am raising up evil against you from your own house, and shall take your wives before your eyes, and give them to your neighbors, and he shall lie in your wives in the sight of the sun. So this is what we witness Absalom do with the 10 concubines who David leaves behind. He, at the advice of Bathsheba's grandfather, who is seeking some vengeance for his betrayal of Uriah, advises him to do it in broad daylight, to sleep with his concubines on his roof as a symbol that his usurpation is gaining motion. 12th verse, for you did it in secret, but I shall do this deed before all Israel and before the sun. And David said to Nathan, I have sinned against Yahweh. And Nathan said to David, also Yahweh has put away your sin, and you shall not die. However, because by this deed you have greatly scorned Yahweh, the child who is also born to you shall certainly die. So the immediate consequence of the shattering of his family comes with the stillborn death. He's alive for about 26 days. His original child with Bathsheba, she also conceives Solomon, and he becomes the heir to the throne. But Solomon was not the only son of David. There is also an elder one by the name of Amnon, and the verse we want to read is the first verse of the 13th, which reads, and after this it came to be that Absalom, son of David, had a lovely sister whose name was Tamar, and Amnon, son of David, loved her. Amnon is the older half-brother. He's the designated heir for all intents. Absalom. Now, after this, we have no reliable time frame, but it does take place about a year after it with the math, because Absalom's rebellion takes 11 years after this, after the events in the 13th chapter. And so his rebellion occurs in the 32nd of David's 40th year on the throne. And what he does is, now there was no prior indication that Amnon was smitten by Absalom's full sister and his full half-sister. So what happened is that an evil spirit overtook him within that year, causes him to rape her, and this compels Amnon to summon him not long after, in broad daylight, where his men slay him in open field. He's in exile. He retreats to his grandfather's terrain, for security and protection. But David still, he mourns over his son, but he's still sentimentally attached and is affectionately involved with Absalom, and he yearns to bring him back, and so Joab arranges it towards Absalom, and they're reconciled, but Absalom has more devilish intent than David, whose weakness is in spoiling his children, perhaps looks. So the opening verse of the 15th chapter reads, "And it came to be after this that Absalom prepared a chariot and horses for himself, and 50 men to run before him." This was forbidden and warned against in Deuteronomy 17 when Moses warns what will happen when Israel selects a king. One of them eventually will summon chariots and horses for themselves. And Solomon certainly did that for himself, and he looked to Egypt for his horses. But Absalom was the first royal member to have a chariot. David did not. "And Absalom used to rise early and stand beside the way to the gate. And it came to pass, whenever anyone who had a complaint came to the king for a judgment, that Absalom would call to him and say, 'What city are you from?' And when he said, 'Your servant is from such and such a tribe of Israel,' Absalom would say to him, 'Look, your matters are good and right, but you have nobody from the king to hear you.'" So Absalom's exploiting this sort of deficiency in the royal judicial system. Not everyone who has a complaint, litany, or grievance can be accommodated as efficiently as he liked, but he's instilling them that if he was in David's place, they would have their audience, they would have their judgment. And, he says, "Your matter is good and right. There's no evidence of any investigation into the inquiry or the grievance or anything." So he's just flattering them. He's not really being a proper judge. He's saying, if I were in David's place, you would have your audience and I would rule justly. So he's instilling in the masses the idea that David is replaceable. "And Absalom would say, 'Oh, that I were made judge in the land, and everyone who has any complaint or case would come to me, and I shall let it right be done to him.'" So the only thing that's stopping him from implementing a more perfect justice than his father is his father being safely secured on the throne. He wants that for himself under the fabricated pretense of administering justice. He is a self-centered creature. He has rebellion in his heart and usurpation and tyranny and subterfuge, and he uses flattery to that end by telling the masses that their cases would be heard and their grievances adjusted and met and satisfied if only he were king. "And it came to pass, whenever anyone came near him to bow down to him, that he would put out his hand and take him and kiss him." So he went through public displays of affection, the taking him and kissing him. That was how the people in the ancient world greeted friends and welcomed guests. So whenever anyone approached him, he would treat them accordingly and ostentatiously and not sincerely, because he's doing it all for show. But David was a hero and Absalom was a celebrity. So Absalom didn't really do anything to earn the throne save be born from this hero. And there is a difference between a celebrity and a hero. A celebrity is a self-exalting creature, whereas a hero is a self-sacrificial one. So Absalom had none of the qualities or characteristics that were proven by David in the furnace of affliction or the line of fire of battlefield to be their king. All he's doing is telling them that if I was in my father's shoes, your wrongs would be right. "And Absalom did this to all Israel who came to the king for judgments. And Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel." So all of Israel, there wouldn't have been we have the doctrine of the separation of powers in our system of government. We have an executive, a legislative, and a judiciary. In most ancient governmental structures, the executive and legislative and judiciary would be combined in the king. So the king was the one responsible to see all grievances and right all wrongs and to issue and administer justice. And all of Israel would have came to him, and it would have been impossible by that system for all to secure an immediate audience with the king. Judgment is not the only kingly responsibility, so you can't accommodate everyone as efficiently as they would like in this system. But in any case, Absalom stole the hearts and affection of the men of Israel. He was at this point more popular than David because these people, they had this man after God's own heart on the throne. They had gotten used to him and settled with him and accustomed to him and had grown to take him for granted. Then this young inspirational figure, he's about 30 years old, the same age David was when he ascended to the throne at this point. So there would have been, for 4 years, he would have been making his standing at the gate and interrupting the flow of judgment and actually preventing and hindering them from receiving their audience by the king by just telling them, I would hear you if I were king. And it came to be at the end of 4 years that Absalom said to the king, Please let me go to Hebron and pay the vow which I vowed to Yahweh. The king would have been David, his father, and even though he's usurping him and undermining him behind his back in broad daylight, he still has his private trust and affection. Hebron was the original place where David was king of Judah. He ruled there for 7 years, and it wasn't until he wrestled or was ceded control of the lingering remnant of the house of Saul some 7 years later that he moved the capital to Jerusalem. And so what Absalom's doing is he's exploiting these people's grievances on account of their central significance being replaced by this city in Jerusalem. For your servant vowed a vow while I dwelt in Geshur in Aram, saying, If Yahweh indeed brings me back to Jerusalem, then I shall serve Yahweh. Geshur would have been the territory where his grandfather, a king, not a Jew, but a king nonetheless, and so David's royal marriages would have been mixed between royalty, and he's telling him that he made a vow. He calls himself his servant when he's actually trying to undermine, overthrow, and usurp him. So he's flattering and deceptive, and flattery is not communication. Flattery is manipulation. So whenever we meet a character like Absalom telling us everything we'd like to hear, but not necessarily everything we like to know, we have to recognize him and his spirit for who he is. He is trying to mislead us. But David had let his guard down. It was his son, so of course he loved him and he was weak towards him. And, he took him at his word that he is motivated by service to Yahweh. This is a man who is a king after God's own heart. And here he has his son reflecting the similar ethos which he had. And the king said to him, Go in peace. And he rose up and went to Hebron. Now he wishes him peace, but Absalom's going to come with war in his hands. He's going to return with his chariots and his bodyguards and an entire army to remove his father from the throne, who wishes him well and wishes him peace. And just like that, he goes to Hebron. But Absalom sent spies throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, As soon as you hear the sound of the ram's horn, then you shall say, Absalom is king in Hebron. So this is the conspiracy. At the sound of the trumpet, they will declare him their king, and he's using Hebron to be the capital where he, as his father had been anointed there or crowned there, so too would he. And he's sending spies throughout all the tribes of Israel. So he has the allegiance of at least a significant fraction of every tribe in Israel. There were 12 of them, and he was prudent enough to not limit his conspiracy to Judah, the tribe from which he hailed alone. And with Absalom went 200 men from Jerusalem, who were invited, and they went along unsuspectingly, and did not know the matter at all. So these 200 men from Jerusalem who were with them, they had no idea what they were signing up for, no idea what they were summoned for, no idea what laid ahead. They just went as a matter of course, as a matter of obedience, and they were about to find out in the midst of after being called what they had been called for. Absalom also sent for Ahithophel, the Gileonite, counselor of David, from his city, from Gilo, where he was bringing offerings. And it came to be that the conspiracy became strong, for the people with Absalom kept increasing. Ahithophel was the grandfather of Bathsheba, the woman who had David put the whole circus in motion by seducing her But she wanted revenge on how David had betrayed her granddaughter's original husband and just kind of stolen her. And he was a trusted advisor of David at this point. His switch in allegiance would have been devastating to him, because he was a counselor of David from his city, Jerusalem, and that they're bringing offerings, which are sacrifices, in Gilo. In the conspiracy, the treasonous rebellion gathers steam, gathers storm, and the people for Absalom grow as this conspiracy progresses. Ultimately, it's an ill-fated conspiracy, which leaves the main conspirator, the would-be usurper, with his head hanging from a tree. So it does not end well for him. But that's all the time we have for today. We'll probably pick this up on a later date. Thank you so much for being here. Take care until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.